Hello. Today, La Vallée des Cloches by Ravel. The Valley of the Bells. I'm convinced that minimalism might have been born that day. Perhaps the day Debussy wrote Image Book 1's third piece Mouvement. Or perhaps it wasn't any of these two, but perhaps in the subconscious of the composers who developed in America this incredibly interesting style, genre of music, that must have been examples to follow. And the two are very close in time of writing, so. In the case of Ravel's, it's very striking because it doesn't have a triad, major or minor, like Debussy. It has just fourths, which are perfect, nor major nor minor, therefore not in a combination of modal contrasts of major or minor, because they're neutral by essence, being perfect, and not major nor minor, though the way they're combined, you have a little bit of resonance of inversion of a triad, which happens to be major, but it's not in E nor in G sharp, but a little bit of both. It's a hint, it's a bittersweet, or as the French say, doux amer, first the sweet and the bitter. And it carries that sense of, I heard that somewhere, from far away, from as far as deep as I can dig from my memory. It's like as if you awaken some distant memory. And because they're by a group of six when they're four, you have never the first beat coming in, so you have this rhythmic suspension in the air. You don't feel strong or down or weak beat or upbeat. Any of these upbeat or downbeat doesn't exist. It's just sort of like floating. I advise my students to play from very close up, meaning the fingers on the keys and the keys halfway in the sound before the sound projects, and then push very fast into the under second escapement, and you have that. To avoid the full sound projection with the consonant plus the resonance with the pedal, you can blah blah blah, but it has to blend in the background, like Satie used to say for his own music, at least they say he did, musique d'ameublement. He called his music furniture music, background music. In this way, it's also in the background of the soundscape of this music painting. That's why I think it's important to play without the articulation of the attack of the finger on the key. So he pa 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 ta ha ha, almost vanishing, barely resonating, but with the pedal accumulatively abounding to the harmonics that it creates in the air. It's not just sol fa mi fa or G F E G or G F E F G. Cannot say it in English. Sol do si do sol fa mi fa. I also suggest to my students to play the octaves as if they pizzicato them by plucking them. As if they take the two black keys, G sharp, and they just, the moment of impact, they don't push down, they don't push in, they just squeeze, squeeze in. Like, yeah. It's an illusion of pizzicato, since we don't touch the string, unlike other instruments. We go through the action of the piano, which translates our intentions. But we have the delusional illusion as pianists, probably denial, that we can sing or we can pizzicato, but we can't neither nor. But we have the illusion we do. And the octaves can be voiced, in this case practically for the top note by the thumb, which is louder anyway, or easier loud, so that you don't have just octaves. I think the octave is there because well, I don't know actually why it's there. I assume, I guess, is because it hugs the pattern of the fourths. And it sort of, yes, hugs it. It would have worked with single one. But with the octaves, it gives more richness to the sound. Then he adds this unexpected G natural in the bass. Which it's not bitonal because for not being in the same tonality. I think it's more like colorization. Of course, for me it's most likely an alteration to the tonality, but nevertheless it could have been a tone from these. C sharp, F sharp, G sharp, but not. And I think the sol natural or G natural gives that sense of vibration of the very subtly rubbing harmonics bass note that resonates more than it's played. Proceeded not so much by tonal, atonal, bitonal, monotonal, semitonal, I don't know which tonal. I don't think it was per se an exercise in a given ideology of post-tonal writing. I think it was more about combining literally sensitivity to shades, lights, colors, smells, all kinds of senses are awakened in these combinations. Here, Ravel does that already in the sonatine, though being more tonal when he does. So he combines this idea of the bass being resonant and distant in the very low register. He does that in the Valse Noble et Sentimentale in the last movement. See how much these composers from the what we call Impressionist time period, because we connect to the painters, obviously. Symbolists, if it was the poetry, who didn't call themselves Impressionists, or didn't want to, because in French, Impressionniste in that time meant amateur. So that's how the painters were mocked by the Le Figaro newspaper reviewer, who wanted to say how unacademic their paintings are. And they took it as a manifesto for their own by using this term, which is derogatory. But because they painted the moods that the landscapes inspired them, not the landscapes themselves. That was photography that was at that time very on its birth. And in the same way, you can say that, and I find that very appealing, that the composers like Debussy, Ravel, possibly Fauré in some of his works too, not all the time, use the resonance of the piano as an instrument to evoke the nature, the resonance of some mood or thought or place, or in the case of the Valley of the Bells or the Sad Bird. Of the decaying resonant beat held with the pedal, piano harp style resonance, not dampers interrupted by the piano's dampers, as if it was partly an organ with a long resonance of the harmonic progression, and then they would have this kind of watery, almost untouchable, vanishing. And they play with that shadow and light, chiaroscuro, on the fact that they obtain this kind of sounds that justify themselves in terms of the combination of tastes or moods or atmospheres by the speed or the delay speed of their decay. But it's in the decay, so in other words, they're exhaling. It's not so much about their articulation on the note itself, but it's what you instillate by starting it and then let it resonate and hear the vibration of it. In the Sad Bird or in the Valley of the Bells. Proceed like the painters by painting the psychological, depicting in their soundscapes the psychological atmosphere impression that they want to depict, either from nature, either from the mood. Some of the titles are very obvious when he says the Naoumoff. Or the little boat on the big ocean with the waves. Or the arpeggio is supposed to represent the waves, but also the drops of the water on each 30 seconds. And the wind on the sail being this descending group of fourths, a bit like in the ones he uses for the Valley of the Dolls, but combined with, on the top of it, the two holding and cross-crossing, that little sweet dissonance, or I call it the kiss. You does that in the last, no, one before last Valse Noble. In this next beat. So this kind of sensorial, sensitive, sensual, using the decaying sounds delayed by the pedal and the resonance of the vibrations as effects to define a soundscape when the title of the piece is to be the illustration or to be per se program music. And then the loneliness of the boat, small boat on the ocean, is the melody that comes out of it. The bigger waves. Sense of not playing solid like Beethoven sonata, though in the later sonatas even Beethoven starts already to water down the solidity of the articulation, of the projection of the sound of the piano, and here it totally watered. In the Valley of the Bells, he goes into a chorale. So I choose here to voice it towards the top notes. But in some schools they would say, since it's a chorale, you should hear the chord in its fullness, even if it's softer, rather than voiced. Which I think gives it a 3D dimensional depth, as well as the very soft basses that you hear by the resonance, not by the plucking of the articulation. If not, I think it becomes too mundane, too obvious, too daily. You hear this and this at the bass. Even if you play it softly like that, I'll try to not be devil's advocate, but really give it a change and say, okay, that could be another option that is valuable. Sorry, I voiced by default. I will try to give the example. I want to avoid doing it. Something like that. But it's so against my grain. I would like to have something like a very almost silent but then resonant, blossoming bass note that kind of rises into the resonance by the vibration that it produces after it's played, and not to hear so much the moment where you plug playing it or you push the keyboard and therefore the key, and therefore the hammer hits the string, obviously, but something more mysterious that you don't hear the beginning of the sound of, just sort of how just it blossoms into your distant hearing, like and then the chord, the F sharp, C sharp octaves more, the harmonization less, just touched, not plucked, not pushed, and using the pedal. kind of sculpting the sound's resonance. Variety of the timbres of the orchestra and the unity of the timbres of the piano. In order to obtain that, you play more the shadow and the lights of the single timbre of the piano rather than the opportunity to have oboes, flutes, etc. And each of those B flats less than the dominant seventh chord. I think this valley of the bells calls for echoes. Then starts from deep inside the middle range, the rising of the chorale. And then from very far away, the top. As they say, don't talk to the bus driver because it distracts. I'm sorry, between sections, because I have to tell you what I think it's important to find, to define, and to present, which is how to deal with the echo cells when the music and they use the restatement. Is it echo? Is it more? Is it just the same? Is it just a term of endearment that repeats itself to create more a sense of emotion because it's meaningful? It's difficult to know, but they produce a lot of this sort of twin restatements as soon as said. In the classic style, you have groups of 8 bars that can be restated, or even group of 16 bars with a repeat. Here it's within each almost bar. Of course, the bars are stretched. So it becomes more like a sort of a stutter, but not really stutter. It's more like a restatement, a term of endearment, I think. At least that I find that to be. And again. Restating the accompaniment. I think it gives that sense of stagnation while moving at the same time, but still the direction of the line, the narration, and the bells on E flat, which are restated right away. Echo cell, I call it so. reflection, this daydream, this meditation, that this music, quasi-static while moving slowly with hints of a chorale or perhaps a melody, but not imposing as a leitmotif thematically, is just more about discovering something so marvelous that all the senses are heightened to receive it. And I find that very difficult to know exactly how it's going to come out on each piano, because you play on the very edge of the sound production, and some action of pianos might be uneven and some notes might just burst louder than you expect or control, and some others softer, despite the imagination you can have of the orchestral combination of timbres translated through the shadow and lights of the piano, the chiaroscuro. And in fact, it reveals itself differently each time. And so the pedaling matters a lot if you're going to shiver it, in order to not over accumulate the repetitivity of the patterns. So maintain it triple pianissimo if it is, and then a double pianissimo for this, and perhaps very distant. In fact, you should never think when you play soft, this kind of repertoire that is soft in the sense of volume soft or in texture soft compared to strong or loud. It's mostly about being very dense but very distant. Like you see an army from far away where they look like ants, but you know, because you see it's an army, you know they're arriving. So you imagine from close up what a roar it is, but it's coming from far away. So it's a sort of an intense whisper, intense hint of the resonance that must be from close up, but from far away. So I think it's more about perspectives rather than volume dynamics. It's more about distances. It's more about echoes. Very immaterial almost, as if you deal with the resonances more like the scent of the perfumes or of the nature in the garden. I find that fascinating to teach, of course fascinating to play. In fact, sometimes very difficult to control, because not keyboards, well, every keyboard is different. And some are heavy, some are deeper, some are both. And if you don't apply exactly the amount of weight from close up in order to touch the depth of the sound from the halfway in the key and going to the second escapement, you don't obtain that controlled, soft but dense resonant sound. It's not all about playing with unichord and right foot pedal and just caressing the keys, which is choreographically very appealing, but in terms of the sound production, it doesn't work that way, even if that's the effect you want to obtain, because it's some kind of a caress, some kind of a wind blowing very softly, or perhaps on the sails, like. All senses are involved, but so hinted, so suggested, barely even more than more, less. And in the middle section of this Barque sur l'Océan, about the National Geographic kind of music depicting the nature and those incredible shows that shows you life, natural life, animal life in the wild wilderness, and you think, oh, that's marvelous. Of course, it's cruel, it's strong, it's dangerous, it's what it is. And I think music becoming the in this case more specifically the relating it to the instrumental capacities to evoke it. It's evocative, that's true. But I think to a certain extent, it's also to reimagine when you play it how to obtain it. And not everybody will play the same way. And I think that's fine too, because the classical piano is way too much become an organized system for look-alikeness through reciting of recitation of or texting, and the only differentiation that would be objective would be the amount of wrong notes or not. And I find that dictatorship of the wrong note stupid. In fact, of course, I encourage my students through technique practice that I suggest to be most reliable so they don't give in to the mistake, because nobody teaches or wishes practicing to have the mistake happen. So you control everything and then it shouldn't happen. Beyond control, you have to also express something about what you play. You have to have a taste, a culture, a cultivated sound, a cultivated understanding of the ecosystem in which this piece exists. Therefore, appear what you should be when you perform, convinced, hopefully convincing, but convinced. And of course, you deal with the unexpected of a different instrument every time you play on. And so to get into the control of the micro details like this that are played at the very level of the birth of sound before it even really blossoms, it's taking a certain risk in comparison to playing fully mezzo forte. I like to give this example, but it could be also from the French repertoire. It can be played more, pragmatically, or or then you can take a calculated risk by practicing a lot the precision of the knuckle to tip for the edge of the keys when you want them to be a certain pianissimo, and dosage them compared to the others, and then voice the octaves. Even from close up, this softer, and the bass on the edge of the key, on the tongue, the same G that you play for this sonata. And of course, the lower keys are heavier because of the action of the piano being so, compared to the high register. So you have to prepare in order to play with a straight finger close to the key, in the key, and then halfway. It's really sound painting. It's no question about it. It's poetic. It's like a foreign language that you hear for the diphthongs and the sounds without the meaning, and you're entering the poetry, which is, by it's some kind of a daydream where you don't care if the meaning of the words are carried. It's the resonance, the sound, and you imagine that it could be a beautiful word meaning something that you think it evokes. And after all, music could be a foreign language too. And the way you manage all this colorization of the soul, the imagination of the different psychological moods, superimposed or one next to the other, I think it allows for the performers to be more creative within the right notes, I find. But of course, you have to be daring to control more the voicing, the sculpting of the sounds, and to have a meaningful direction of the way you want to go to, because without that, it's just colors for colors, sound for sounds, effects for effects, which are cute and they're interesting at the beginning, but become boring soon because it seems to be going nowhere. And you don't have to make it go somewhere if it doesn't, because sometimes the music is stagnant. But from times, even if you have a distant chorale that doesn't go further than where it does, and it has the repetitivity of the echo cell, as I call it, I think you should still follow it until the last note of it. Doesn't stop you from being rigorous with the details of the written score, as Ravel didn't like interpretation, supposedly. How he's saying, play me, don't interpret me. But I still think that within that rigor, rhythmic, harmonic, melodic, pedal, all the soundscape imagined in the writing notation, there is still this room for you to create your own ecosystem, your own inspired and inspirational mood setting from these pieces that are evocative more than they're explanative. They're more bringing you into yourself as a listener as well as performer, obviously, but you have to be focused on what you play. Inner Sehnsucht, as the Germans say, the inner thinking about, inner search about who you are, what you're about. And I think that this kind of introspective listening of this music enriches the listener. And there can be many listeners together, and they all enter in their own introspection through the same piece, which is different from each other, the way they receive it. And I find that fascinatingly beautiful. And I try to bring each piano student who plays this music to become their own sculptors of these sounds, and as well meaningful than also just prettyful, but both. It's nothing wrong to hope that you don't make a mistake. Okay, you might have a loss in translation moment if you thought, oh, this chord came out too loud, or this chord I wanted this way, or this melody didn't come out. It never comes out exactly like you always planned, because you play on a different instrument, and you don't play like when you practice, because it's a different intensity when you go through the piece in front of people holding their breath than when you practice over and over in this empty room. In this case here, it's not empty because it's full of your attention, and I thank you for it very much. Thank you.